My best friend died suddenly, and just like that, I became Sophie's guardian. I had no idea what I was doing. She spoke in nods and shrugs. I left cartoons on, cooked frozen pizza, waited. One night I heard her crying in her room, clutching a picture of her dad. I sat with her silent. It didn't fix anything, but it meant something, and I didn't yet know her grandparents were watching, waiting to take her back. Sophie's silence felt like a test I kept failing. I canceled my coding projects, turned down a contract. My boss warned me. My mom, always practical, asked if I was sure this was smart. I wasn't. But when Sophie left a drawing of us on my keyboard, a stick figure me with wild hair, I cried in the hallway that night. I booked a cabin in the woods, stargazing, something David once mentioned. I hoped she'd see I was trying. We arrived at the cabin, and Sophie barely looked up. I lit a fire, burned dinner, and said nothing. She finally whispered, "Dad used to tell stories about the stars." That night, she let me sit beside her, just sit. I felt something shift. Then a letter came. Mr. and Mrs. Reed had filed for custody. "We can give her what he can't," it said. My chest caved in. I tried to talk to Sophie, but she shut down completely. At school, she got into a fight, first time ever. The counselor called me and she's scared. She said of losing you. That night, I found a broken bracelet in Sophie's bag, one David gave her. I fixed it with tape, left it by her pillow. She wore it the next morning. No words, but that was her answer. The Reeds visited unannounced, bearing gifts and fake smiles. Sophie clung to my side, silent. Mr. Reed said, "You're just a placeholder." I snapped, "I'm not pretending. They warned me lawyers were coming." After they left, Sophie handed me an old voicemail, David's voice, naming me guardian. Her hands shook, mine too. That recording was our lifeline. We backed it up 3 times. We were in a war now. In court, the Reeds painted me as unstable, a loner with no parenting skills. My mom stood up. "He gave up everything for that child." Sophie took the stand, voice shaking. "He stayed when everyone else left." I clutched the stargazing photo she drew, our night sky. The judge paused, then ruled guardianship remains. Sophie cried into my shirt. That night, we camped indoors, stars taped to the ceiling. The Reeds retreated, silent in defeat. Sophie began humming around the house again. I returned to freelance work, smaller projects, things I could pause if she needed me. One afternoon, she brought me cocoa and whispered, "You stayed." That word, stayed, meant everything. I hung her stargazing picture above my desk, our new constellation. When the adoption finalized, Sophie asked to add Mills to her name. Mills Reed. I nearly dropped my coffee. She grinned. "So people know I chose you too." We had pancakes that night, with too much syrup. Her bracelet stayed on. My mom sent a card, "You were always meant to be hers."